Hear now the word of the Lord, as it is written in Exodus chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. This is the story of the 10 plagues, and this is just in the middle of the plagues that Moses was, the Lord was casting on the Egyptians so that they would be freed from slavery. So chapter 9 begins saying, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go in to the Pharaoh and tell him, Thus says the Lord God of Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, and on the oxen and the sheep, a very severe pestilence. And the Lord will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel.' Then the Lord appointed a set time, saying, 'Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land.' So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. Then Pharaoh sent, and indeed not even one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go. So the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it will become a very fine dust in all of the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils that break out in sores on man and beast throughout the land of Egypt.' Then they took ashes from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses scattered them towards the heavens, and they caused boils that break out in sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and all of the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses." We also read from the work Divine Providence, from the Word for the New Church, in number 152. Now, since we do have an internal self and an external self, or an inside and an outside, since both of them need to be reformed if we ourselves are to be reformed, and since we cannot be reformed unless we look into ourselves or examine ourselves, see and admit what is wrong with us, and then refrain from doing it, it follows that it is not just at the outside that needs to be looked into, but the inside as well. If only the outside is looked into, then all we see is what we have actually done. We have not killed anyone, or committed adultery, or stolen anything, or perjured ourselves, and so on. That is how we look into our physical evils, but not into our spiritual ones. However, we do need to look into the evils of our spirit in order to be reformed. Since we live as spirits after death, and all the evil in our spirits are still there. The only way to look into our spirits is to pay attention to what we are thinking, and especially what we intend or what we are striving for. Since what we are striving for is what we have in mind because of our intentions. That is where our evils have their origin and their roots, in the compulsions and pleasures. Unless we see and acknowledge them, we are still caught up in them, even though we may not act on them outwardly. We can see this from the following words of the Lord, that thinking on the basis of our intentions is both intending and doing. The Lord said in the Gospel of Matthew, "If anyone has looked at someone else's wife so far as to lust for her, he has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This kind of examination is proper to the inner self, and in essence, it leads to the examination of our outer selves. Here end our lessons. Blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So about 20 years ago, a man that was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, named Charles Schulz, passed away. And you might not know his name, but you would certainly know the name of who he created or what he created. Charlie Brown. It's really just coincidental that he was born in Minnesota in the moment that we're dealing with right now. But I wanted to draw your attention to something that he once said. I think it was in jest, or I'm pretty sure it was. He said, "I have never made a mistake in my life. I thought I did once, but then found out I was wrong." My dad had a similar saying, probably inspired by Schulz, where he often would say, "I've only been wrong once, and it was this time that I thought I was wrong, but then later on found out I was right." Now, these are just kind of silly-sounding statements, but it's a really hard thing for us to admit when we're wrong, to admit when we make mistakes. It's even harder to accept that some of our ideas are false. Some of the institutions that we believed in our whole lives, that might be false. And not just falsity, but it might be falsity stemming from evil. I'm just going to come out and say it. Hope it's not a surprise. We have all been wrong. We have all made mistakes. And yeah, we've probably based a lot of our lives on thoughts of falsities that stem from some evil. Sometimes we do this knowingly, and sometimes in ignorance. This sounds pretty harsh. I mean, if we're only just talking about saying things that aren't true sometimes, or things that are false, or believing something that's false, it's not as bad. But what if we add that evil part in, falsities from evil? And this is a very specific term that we're going to discuss a little bit. When we add that other element that we do and say things that are false from evil, that sometimes we base our thinking and actions on falsities that stem from evil. This takes on a whole new weight, and a weight that we don't really want to recognize in ourselves. But we don't really seem to have a problem recognizing evils in other people. We like to call them out. We look outside of ourselves and find some false idea or something wrong in another person. It's really quite easy for us to go, "Oh, that person is such and such." We see or we hear or we read something that we disagree with or think is false, and then we're very quick to attach evil motives to the person doing it, or saying the thing, or writing whatever it was. We might say, "Oh, they're only saying that because they're trying to save face," or "They're doing that because they're going to gain something from it." We impose motives onto other people. We even take it a step farther sometimes to judge another person's whole character based on a few statements, actions, or even just the color of their skin. You might say, "Well, that person's up to no good. They're dangerous, they're lazy, or ignorant, or whatever." Or, "That person must be evil, bigoted, power-hungry, racist." We just can throw out all these accusations, and sometimes we might even be right. But that's not the point today. Today we're talking about the practice of examining our own thoughts and our own intentions, recognizing our own faults, our own false thinking, and our own tendencies towards hatred, revenge, pride, love of power, bigotry, or racism. You see, when other people point these things out in us, it's really hard to take. It's really hard to accept, and our first move almost always is to go into defense mode. It doesn't matter how much proof another person can give us for how and why we are, or how we're engaged in some behavior that's hateful or wrong or false or self-serving. We have to see it for ourselves. All of us. Not a single person is in the clear because nobody is perfect. No one should free themselves from the responsibility of examining their own thoughts and intentions to discover the falsities from evil that are in their understanding and our loves that are based on it. One more thing, this self-examination that we need to do or be doing, we can't do it according to our own standards. We can't even do it to the standards of somebody else, the standards of society. We need to do it in accordance with the Lord's standards that He shows us in His holy word. In the Psalms, Solomon wrote in Psalm 127, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." The house that King Solomon spoke of in this psalm is an image of our mind. It's all of our ideas, the things we learn, our understanding of the life that we live. And that city that has to be guarded is an image of our belief system, our doctrine, the tenets of whatever faith that is guiding the way that we live. And if either of those things are not from the Lord and from His word, our lives will be lived in vain. I want to bring all of this together in talking about the story of the plague of the boils in chapter 9 of Exodus. But before we can really understand how much this story identifies with us, we kind of need to understand what Egypt represents in our lives. If you read your Bible, and I encourage you to do so, you would notice that there are many times when people go down to Egypt. You have Abraham who goes and sojourns in Egypt. Then you have Joseph that goes down, and eventually all of the sons of Israel. And then we also have the Lord Himself being taken to Egypt when He was a youth. Why all this traveling down to Egypt? Most of the time you'll notice that when they go down to Egypt, it's because there's a famine in the land. There's a lack of something, and it's also threatening to their lives. So on a spiritual level, or meaning in us, Egypt represents our natural knowledge or facts. Everyone needs to learn them. We need to learn how this natural world works and how it operates and how we can operate in it. But this world, this life is not just for here and now. We live our lives here until we die, and then it's all over, right? No, it doesn't work that way. We continue to live forever. This life is really only a seed bed, the beginning, the preparation for eternal life. But how easy is it to get stuck here, thinking and living only for what is natural? We get stuck thinking of only natural things or material gain, physical pleasure, worldly prosperity. We could even say that we become slaves to this world. We become so obsessed by what is purely external. And this stunts the growth of our spirit. And in the long run, or in the eternal view, it separates us from heaven. Another way we can think about what is natural versus what is spiritual is thinking about our loves. We have some very natural loves, which we would call the love of ourself and the love of the world, because those are things that are present here all the time. The higher loves, though, spiritual loves, are ones where we have love for our neighbor and love for the Lord. There's a passage in the work Divine Love and Wisdom that we're going to read that talks about how we can get stuck just in loving ourselves and in loving the world, and how that is like slavery. It says, the reason love for ourselves and the love of the world are hellish loves, the reason we could become absorbed in them and thereby destroy our own will and understanding, is that as created, love for ourselves and love for the world are heavenly loves. They are, in fact, loves proper to our physical self and service to our spiritual loves. the way that a foundation is supposed to serve for a house. It is love for ourselves and love for the world that prompt us to care about our bodies, to want nourishment, clothing, and housing, to take care of our homes, to look for jobs in order that we might be useful, to be granted respect due to the worth of our responsibilities so that people heed us, and even to find delight and recreation in worldly pleasures. All of these activities, however, should be for the sake of usefulness. They bring us into a state of serving the Lord and the neighbor. In contrast, when there is no love for serving the Lord and the neighbor, when there is nothing but love for using the world to suit ourselves, then the love becomes hellish instead of heavenly. It makes us focus our minds and spirits on our self-image, which intrinsically is completely evil. A good example of how a corrupt love of self and love of the world affects us is how much something as external as like our skin color can determine one person's worth as a human being compared to another. This is still an issue. Very external thing. But there is a dream that we have all probably heard, voiced by Dr. Martin Luther King, that one day a person will not be judged by the color of their skin, their very external appearance, but by the content of their character. That's that interior. We are living in a time right now where we are trying to see to it that this dream will come true, that we can become united in an effort to throw off the shackles of prejudice. And this has been a very painful struggle. And it's a struggle that we're not going to get through without the leadership and guidance of the Lord's Word. This is what this story is all about. And the main portion of this story, of the plagues that we're going to focus on, is that plague of the boils, because it speaks very powerfully to our work in self-examination. I think it's also important to mention that this talk this morning is not meant to only address the struggle that our society is having with equality. That's just one example, a potent example of the many aspects of our lives and minds which need to be rescued, to be set free. Think about what the Lord says, "Let my people go." He's talking about us. Let my people go. He's talking about us being the people that need to be set free from the bondage or the slavery of hell in our lives. You see, there is so much value in every one of our lives, but that value is crushed when we make life only about ourselves in this world. The Lord wants to set us free from the bondage of this world, just as he told the Pharaoh, "Let my people go." One of the most important tools that we have to be freed is the tool of self-examination. And when we are truly honest with ourselves, self-examination that is to look at our lives, look at our thoughts, look at our intentions, and compare them to what the Word teaches, it can be painful. We don't like to see or recognize when we're wrong. We get a really powerful image of self-examination in the plague of the boils. In this, Moses is a representation of the Lord's Word. That furnace that he's supposed to put his hand into is our heart, the life of our will. And whatever is burning in that furnace is what we love. In this case, our evil and destructive loves. So then Moses takes the ashes from the furnace and he scatters them towards the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh, and it goes and it blankets everything and causes boils that break out in sores. The ashes that Moses grabs with his hands are the falsities that stem from those evil loves. Think about that powerful image of what our evils can do when they are actually spread out, when we can actually examine what those things are and what are the effects they would have if we were to act on those loves. When we take the Lord's Word and examine our hearts and see What would happen if I were to do this wrong thing? It gives us a really painful image of boils that break out in sores so bad that it says that the magicians weren't able to even move. They couldn't stand because of them. It's not fun to be brutally honest with ourselves when we compare our lives to the life that the Word teaches. And one of the most important and effective parts of this self-examination is when we look at the actual consequences. What are the consequences? That's that scattering of the ashes in our lives. Arcana Celestia 73:73 says, "A person is immersed in love of the world when in what he thinks and does he looks for and is intent only on making gain, with no concern at all about whether it may do harm to the neighbor or to the public." So when we're caught up in these evil loves, loving just ourselves or material gain, that love doesn't care about anybody else. You can see how this can lead to situations like slavery, where one person can own another, because it's really not about them. Their lives have no worth in our mind if we're just thinking about ourselves. There is a lot of pain in our world right now, a lot of suffering, a lot of confusion and anxiety and people lashing out at one another. And we might look at that and say, that's like these boils. It's an expression of something inside of our country, inside of our lives, that is causing this. Pain just doesn't exist for no reason. When we see pain in the world like this, it is a sign of something is really off. The question is, what is or are the evils and falsities that are causing this pain? As a society, we are trying to do this self-examination. But there's one really big problem. If we're not doing this self-examination by means of the Lord's Word, we're not going to get to the root of the problem. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman lays awake in vain. We need to examine our country, our lives, our individual lives, our own hearts by the Lord's Word, not by just random society standards that we create. You know, I think another thing just to tie this into our story from the Gospel of John, we can see some of these evils now. We can see the hatred. We can see the problems. We need to do something about it. It says that, when some of the Pharisees who were there heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' therefore your sin remains." We can see this problem. What are we going to do about it? Friends, there are many wrongs, many evils, many falsities that are being exposed in our society right now. There's the obvious one that everybody's been talking about. But we can also see a level of hatred, of vengeance, of untruthfulness, and pride in our own intelligence and greed. These are all being expressed. We see it. We see it out there. Remember, we like to point at other people and say, "They're this." We see it in others. But are we really willing to look into our own heart to see them there too? If we say that we see and do nothing, our sins will remain. But we can choose to follow the Lord and do everything in our power to root out these evils in ourselves. That's where fixing this starts, is in each one of us. In each one of us going to the Lord's Word and amending our heart with His truth. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman lays awake in vain. Amen. And now to the one, only God, Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.